Welcome to the JMark Business Innovation Technology Experience.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're excited today to talk about an interesting topic. I think I say that every time because they're all very interesting to me. Hopefully they're interesting to you too. It's kind of interesting. I say it again. We were talking this morning about a company that we know that's in our industry. That's another managed service provider uh, that got hit by a ransomware attack. And I don't know all the details. I don't want to presume all the details, but the short of what we do know is that their client got infected from this incident. And that brings up, security is a vital part of everything that happens in IT. And we've talked about how it's worse and worse in the last year. Since COVID began, but it brings about the importance of really doing your homework and checking with your partners on making sure they're the right people. And the reason we decided to talk about this today and brought Jeremy in is because it's managed services is complicated. There's so many if, ands, or buts about it. There's just a lot of different things to consider. And the people that come to us, they are doctors and bankers and lawyers, and they have a lot of training and experience in their field, and they just want their stuff to work. And so buying managed services is one of those things that is just, I don't know what I need. And sometimes people fall into price, and sometimes people fall into a relationship, and they make their choice based on reasons that don't pan out. And so the idea is for us to talk today about, what are the questions that people really should be asking when they're vetting managed services? What are the discussions that should be taking place? And because we want you as business owners to go into these discussions educated, so that you can get the best partner that will meet your needs in your organization. So Jeremy, you've met with probably hundreds and hundreds of prospects and clients over the years. What are some of the common things or surprising things that people ask you that really aren't relevant to buying managed services?
Well, I don't know about not relevant. I don't. I guess everything's relevant to a point, but one of the things that I always find surprising is when you get questions asked about, or when I get questions asked about, um, like how we do it specifically, like the nuts and the bolts. One of the things that has happened in my tenure over the years is that um, managed services has become kind of a throwaway word. It's become commoditized. Everybody's doing it, whether it's in IT managed services, which is I feel like, or at least from my perspective, where the term came from, or I've managed services on my air conditioner. Guy comes out twice a year, does the service. Anything that happens in between gets covered. They call it a managed service. So when it becomes such a ubiquitous term, people feel the need to be an expert in it in order to shop for it. So they start asking questions about what tools do you use and what frequency do your agents check in and things like that, which are not irrelevant points, but those are the kind of really fine detail points that really should come after the bigger question, because I guess I would challenge people not to think of it as hiring a technical service as much as bringing in a business partner, because when you sign up for managed services in the IT world, you're not buying geek, you're buying business. And for somebody to come into your business, or for you to invite them into your business based on geek skills, whenever they really effectively hold the keys to the kingdom when it comes to your data, your customer list, your transactions, your CRM, everything. I think the questions typically should start at a much higher level. Tell me about your company. How long have you been in business? What kind of awards have you won? What kind of recognition do you have in the community of your peers, so that they know who they're talking to? And then you would drill down into those technical type things over time.
Yeah, the one thing you said that I really love is this idea of the business side of it. We've talked about how when you hire managed services, there are business outcomes that should be expected from that service. You're not hiring them just to fix something. You're not hiring them just to make something work. You're hiring them so that these things work and they benefit to the success of the organization and produce business outcomes that help the organization to achieve its objectives and goals. And that's where so many times we've seen where managed services or the vetting of managed services gets delegated down to an office manager or down to others in the organization that don't have that maybe aren't even privy to the organization's goals and the long-term objectives of the organization. And that's why it's so important to get business owners involved and the executives and influencers in the organization, so that they are really taking a part in making sure that this new relationship is going to help them be successful and help them individually and collectively achieve their goals.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just saying, I think those are two conversations that maybe don't get had enough, which is first the internal conversation about what do we want, what are our goals, and what do we want to achieve with the help of our technology, and then the conversation with the MSP, with the IT provider that you're considering, what can you help us achieve? And find out from them, fill in those gaps of things that you can achieve that you might not even be aware of in that internal conversation, and work those things together so that you have that understanding, because that's always the precursor to asking the right questions, is knowing what you want to find out.
Yeah, that's actually the point I was getting ready to make whenever I stepped on your toes. From my perspective, walking in as a sales engineer or as a sales consultant, one of the first things that I'm trying to ascertain isn't, I'm not trying to just tell people all about us, how wonderful we are. I'm trying to ascertain, why am I here? What led this person to ask for an appointment to talk about managed services? Because unfortunately, it's usually a traumatic experience. People don't typically seek out a mechanic when their car is working great. It's usually because it broke. And it's in my mind, in my experience, it's usually one of three things. There's something happened to a person, either an IT person quit, is not performing, something like that. Same thing, but with another managed services company, they're not performing, their contract's up and they're shopping, or something of that nature. Or the one that nobody likes to see, and that's something catastrophic has happened. A server failed, a backup didn't get done, there's been a loss, there's been a breach, something terrible's happened. But all three times it's to rectify, in all three of the situations, we're usually there to rectify a negative situation. So understanding why we're there is first. And then the second thing that I look for, as in my position, is who's my audience? Who am I talking to? So this podcast, just so I make sure I understand, Todd, Dax, Christina, is primarily for business owners, correct? Just want to make sure. So
yes,
when I'm
sorry, I just wanted to say yes out loud because we were all nodding our heads. Then I was like, people aren't going to be able to see us nodding our heads. So.
Fair enough. So, I'm going to prove that I'm going off script when we don't, and the fact that we don't have a script here, because, I might start getting hand signals to stop talking. But I'll tell you one thing that I look for when I walk into an appointment is definitely to gauge my audience, because if I'm dealing with somebody who isn't a stakeholder in the company at some level, that doesn't necessarily mean an owner, but a stakeholder at some level, then their motives usually aren't in line with what the deliverables of managed services are. And by that, I mean that their motives are usually defined by, most typically, how much money can I save the company? How cheap can I get this? I show my value by saving money. That is your typical low-level employee's impression of what brings them value when it comes to shopping for IT. It's, I can buy that computer for $5 cheaper on CDW. Hey, look, boss, I saved us $5. And if you shop for IT services like that, you're going to get burned, because there's always somebody cheaper. What I want to be, or the person I want to be talking to, is a person who has an outcome in mind and is willing to be kind of like Patton in World War II and say, take that hill, take that mountain. Don't tell me how it gets done, take it. That's what I want to hear as an IT provider. My company wants to get from here to there. I need you to design IT to help me get there, and then support me while I do it. Because my business outcome is to hit this revenue number, or this EBITDA number, or to have this expansion level, or whatever that is. IT is a tool to help us complete those goals. So, that's really what I'm looking for, is somebody who really wants a business partner to help them achieve a goal.
I think, the one thing about that I want to make sure people don't hear is this idea of a company that's willing to just say, yes, I'm going to take you to this hill, or to this, whatever this is, because that's one of the biggest problems we see with competitors. And we've talked about this before, how companies say they do X, they say they do Y. We've talked about how patch management is not the same at different organizations. Monitoring is not the same at different organizations. The optimization, the scripting, the automation, all these things are different at different companies. And, taking a hill, do you want to follow someone that's taken a hill before, that knows how to get there, that has the tools, the resources, the people, the experience, the partners, the knowledge to get there? Or you just want someone who says, yes, we can take you there? And a lot of business owners, I think they go through this process, and it's frustrating, because it's distracting them from what they should be doing, from being a lawyer, being a doctor, being a banker, whatever it is. And they get into situations where, they go with the person that says, I can take that hill, I can get you there, this is why. And they're charismatic, and they're telling about all their qualifications, and I don't know, something about them, you like them, and bam, then it goes into a situation that on the long term is not good. And so that's why, and I think you do a great job at this, from my experience, in really vetting and making sure that their motives are in the right place. And I know we've walked away from opportunities where they were just looking for someone to say, I can take that hill and I can do it for really cheap. But that's why it's important to look at these qualifications and the maturity and all these different things. And you mentioned earlier, one of the things to kind of get us back to some of these questions or some of these ideas. You mentioned earlier that Jeremy, that we have to look at the recognition. We have to look at their recognition among peers, their awards, and there are a lot of awards out there that are pay to play. you pay a few $1,000s and you get named as one of the top CEOs in such and such industry. And that's goes into everything. I mean, if it's so easy to fake an award, it's easy to fake being a great managed service provider, which is why you have to look at, you know, is it one award? Is it 20 awards? You know, is it across multiple associations? Is it across different industries? Is it across different sets of people? You know, you look at testimonials, you look at, you know, and that's just that one little level of recognition and respect. You know, are they respected in the industry? And that's like the beginning to start you off to learn about all the maturity and all the other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, real quick, I want to go back to one other point on the whole taking the hill conversation, because I probably didn't frame that up very well. A big point to that makes that successful is being willing to say no. And it's one of the reasons I qualified our audience here. Most business owners can spot a yes man from a mile away. And in the sales process, you know, there's a lot of yes men out there. One of the reasons I feel like I've personally been successful for as long as I have, not to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but is I'm really willing to tell somebody, no, you can't do that. That would be a bad idea. I won't be a part of that because I think it will lead to failure for you. And you know, most people respect that. And if they don't respect that, that's fine. That's just probably not a good partnership for us, because you know we want to align ourselves with people who want to build a healthy go forward strategy and a success plan that is achievable and is safe by current security standards and it is going to achieve the outcomes that they want. If that's unreasonable or unrealistic, then we need to, and the person who's having the conversation from the managed service provider standpoint, the thing that they need to do is be able to be willing to say no, you can't do that, or I can't be a part of that for you. So, and I think that's what leads to longevity in the business. If you're a yes man and you tell everybody yes, we'll make that happen for you, especially in today's day and age, you won't be around long. You're going to take shortcuts. You're going to end up with clients that end up getting compromised by ransomware or other bad things. You're going to cut a quarter on patch management or, God forbid, on backups and have a data loss scenario. So, you know, you can't cut quarters and you can't say yes just to say yes.
The thing about that, being a little bit of a devil's advocate, is that there are companies that do the same kind of thing. They qualify their organization, they MSPs, and they'll be happy to say no, you know, you should do X and Y. But as a business owner focusing on whatever you're doing, how do you know that the X and Y is actually correct? Because we've gone into companies with crazy abnormal systems. I mean, massive SANs and servers for small office environments, and just overspent. And I have to think that the business owner was thinking, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. He's pushing back against my ideas. He really, or this company really is helping us to be successful, you know, by putting in all this infrastructure and lots of blinky lights and things.
Yeah, and I think that leads right back to where we were just at then. You look at the company's reputation. One of the sayings, slogans, themes, there's a word I can't think of, but one of our mantras at JMark is the Leonardo da Vinci quote that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. If people are going to go that route, let me back that up. If you interject unnecessary complication into an environment, it will always come back to haunt you. Always. I I don't like saying always, and I don't like saying never, but I will confidently say always on that. And I think that's where reputation comes into play. That's where the awards and recognition within our industry come into play. Um, it's again, it's not just us. We're talking to business owners here. In the IT industry, there's a lot of pay to play for an award to be the. I get 2 or 3 emails a week, people soliciting for only a $2,000 obligation or advertisement in our magazine. You can be named one of the top 100 blah 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 in the blah blah blah, servicing this vertical market. Well, super duper, that means nothing. And I know lawyers have the same thing, doctors have the same thing, accountants have the same thing, trucking companies have the same thing. It's not unique. Most people can see right through that nonsense. So, you learn to look for the real players, the ones who judge on merit, the ones who hand out recognition, not on a pay to play basis, but based on accomplishments and year over year over year, decade over decade results. Because the people who have played that game of overcomplication and trying to make money and put profits over people, they don't stick around long. And they end up weeding themselves out. Darwinism definitely works in that environment.
Yeah, I think it's a thing where you have to make this decision holistically and not on any one single factor. So it is the recognition, like you're talking about, Jeremy. It is the recommendations from peers and from their clients and the testimonials that they have. It is their experience, their expertise, maybe in your industry, but also in other things. Like you factor in all of these things. And I think that's really important, not to have those blinders on that get you excited about one single area. And in these areas, like you said, Jeremy, it pays to take a little time to just really look at the information that they're giving you, whether it's awards, whether it's testimonials and recommendations that they're sharing. Like you said, Jeremy, we can all recognize. All of us have learned to recognize whether what people are speaking is the whole truth, and whether testimonials are brief, or whether they actually give you an idea. But sometimes I think you're busy and there's a lot to do, and taking the time to really sort of vet this stuff seems like not a priority, because you've got so many other pressing issues that you're worrying about. But I think you have to remember that what you're doing with managed services, with IoT services, is you're investing. And this is a decision that's going to be with you for a long time. And you do need to take some time to make the right decision and not just rush through it because it's something you need to check off a list and try to move on.
Yeah, and not to beat that to death, but I was thinking about, there's this, I don't even know what it's called, but there's almost a psychological drug, if you will, of being the person that chooses a vendor, a partner. And we've seen this over and over. I mean, even internally at JMark, where people, they want to be the person who brings in this partner. And I don't think they realize that it's almost like something internally that is driving that. I mean, sure, they want to do what's best for the organization, but when you think about managed services, and especially if you're delegating it to somebody, you got to go into it knowing you got to spend some time. You got to do homework. It's not something that can just happen. I mean, we've vetted partners. There's a particular product we've been looking at over the last couple of months, and we're up to I think it's vendor 18, because they can't fulfill the security requirements that we have. And not that you should be looking at 18 providers for managed services. This is a different scenario, because when you start at that top of recognition and rewards, you will quickly vet that down to just a handful. And then you go down from there to the next step. And then that next step would be essentially looking at their experience and their qualifications. You know, what's their specialization? Um, do they have experience in your industry? Do they have a dedicated team in your industry? Do they know the software you use? Do they have certifications as a company and as you know, individuals in the company, you know, for technical certifications and security certifications and whatever else is needed? And do they understand the regulations that that you have to abide by? And all of these things, you know, play into just this multi-level step of vetting and weeding out the bad apples so that you can get the best partner to help you be successful.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, when you talk about specialization, that is usually a place where we see a conversation turn. Excuse me. It's really hard to have this conversation without sounding self-aggrandizing. So I'll apologize now, but it's just, so when I started at JMark, and I say self-aggrandizing to JMark, not just myself, I've been through the progression, as Todd has, from small company to a larger company in the IT business. There were 3 of us when I started at JMark, up to around 120 now. So you see the different maturity levels that a company goes through as being part of it, and what that means to its clients. And one of the most stark things that I've talked to a lot of clients about, especially when they call us in because they're unhappy with their current provider because they can't keep up with this, or they can't keep up with me. You know, we hear that a lot. My IT provider just can't keep up with me. We're leaving them in the dust. They're keeping the wheels on the bus, but they're not innovating. They're not helping us make new product. They're not helping us determine the next new thing that IT can do to help us grow. They're keeping us patched and backed up, but barely. We hear that a lot. And I can empathize with that because JMark was that company 10 years ago, 12 years ago. When we had 25 to 30 employees, it was one of the hardest times to be in business for us, because you are trying to be all things to all people and you can't specialize. And that word specialization is huge, because whenever one person has to wear too many hats, they're going to fail at most of them. And being able to put a single hat on a person and say, you are in charge of backups, and you over here are in charge of firewall security, and this and this and this and this, and do that down the line, and then put a team behind those people. So it's not just a single point of failure, because evolutionarily, is that a word? Evolutionarily, that's too many syllables. It's probably not a real word. In the evolutionary scale of growth, you put those roles in place, and then you've got single points of failure, so that if a backup guy goes on vacation for 2 weeks and is in Hawaii, then all the backups fail naturally that week and everything just blows up. So the next step in the evolutionary scale is putting a team behind those and a backup structure behind those people. And it took us until we got over about 60 employees to where we could afford to break that out. And the other cool side effect of that for a customer is that you're dealing with happier people at your provider. You're dealing with people who get to follow a passion. They don't have to wear all the hats. They can pick the hat that fits them best, and then they can get better at that job. They can be more productive. They provide you a better experience and a better product, and they also give you better service because they like their job better typically, versus the guy who's running 90 miles an hour, working 70 hours a week, never gets to see his kids' soccer games. Those people aren't as happy of employees typically, because they're having to do everything. So I think specialization, the ability to specialize, is a sign of maturity in a company that people should look for.
Yeah, Jeremy and Todd, you both mentioned security. And it got me thinking to how we started this conversation, which was the managed service provider company who just had that very unfortunate situation when it comes to security. So, we're kind of talking about questions that you should ask when you're vetting a managed service provider. What kinds of questions should have this company's clients or prospects at the time ask them to potentially have had, an inkling of to what could have happened?
Well, one of the things that I think, Jeremy, you were walking around was this idea of maturity. And I think that's kind of the next step, the next answer to that question, because it's one thing to have recognition. It's one thing to have people willing to say, yes, I like these people, willing to give testimonials on video maybe, and on text, and having certifications and things like that. But as you grow as an organization, there is natural maturity that happens, and one of our board members is an expert in the industry that works with many MSPs, and he talks about how you can't be mismatched in your maturity with your MSP. A client and an MSP cannot be mismatched in their maturity. If one is more mature than the other, there's going to be miscommunications, there's going to be conflict, there's not going to be alignment. And I think that's part of what we see is we see companies who are non-specialized, who say they have security and say they can do security, and then they get in over their head and they just can't handle it all. I mean, we have a social post going out today, and of a image of a screenshot that I took from a Facebook group where some business owner came on and said, "Hey, I just got a medical office, and how do I manage all this for HIPAA and be compliant and all this?" And I'm watching this going, who was the idiot who hired this person? I mean, unfortunately, that's what happens is when you don't take the time to vet your managed service provider, you are risking your business. And we see these discussions happening behind the scenes because we're in the industry. There's some scary stuff out there, and security is one of them. There is so much bad stuff out there, and there are so many IT geeks that think they are security experts, and they are not.
So, Christina, something that you said just sparked something in your question sparked something with me, and I had to write it down so I didn't forget it. This might be one of the things that if we're putting together a buyer's guide for helping a business owner choose a managed service provider, to me, this is one of those little secret things that I would point to as one of those really telling questions that you can ask, and you can weed out the immature service provider from a mature service provider, and it's really simple to do. So you might mark the minutes and seconds of where we're at on this and tag it, because this is a big one. Ask them about their offering as it relates to a particular field, whether that's backups, security. So ask the question, how do you do backups? And shut up. If the service provider answers with a product, you're looking at a pretty immature service provider. If they answer with a process, you should keep talking to them. And that could hold through to security, through ransomware prevention, through patch management, policy and procedure, or patch management. See, I always go straight to policy and procedure because that's what it's about. It's not about the product that provides it. If you ask somebody, how you do backups, and they answer with, backup exec, Unitrends, there's a bunch of good products on the market. none of them matter. What matters is the process and the policy that goes into place and how it's implemented. I'll step off my soapbox now. Somebody else talk.
No, I absolutely agree. You know, that plays directly into the maturity. You know, there's a quote that's, I'm sure I'm gonna mess it up. It's like, small people talk about, you know what it is.
Small minds talk about people, average minds talk about things, and more advanced or larger minds or smarter people or whatever talk about ideas or something to that effect.
Right.
People
And
have
also
ideas.
part of that discussion too is it's not just the idea of throwing out products. It's also, you know, the right managed service provider will, you know, there's some if, ands, or buts in there. It's like, well, there's always discovery in it, in what we do. You know, every client's backup is not configured the exact same way as another client, because it's based on their RTO and their RPO and you know, their desires for being able to restore and have continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And when a provider puts all of their clients in that bucket where, you know, it's this product and it backs up this often, and if you have a problem, we can do this, and then it's totally not in that area that's going to help you.
Yeah, and you know, I found I think about these things and I try to put myself in the place of the average business owner, like you talk about, Todd, the lawyers and doctors and business people that we're talking to who are really smart in their areas, but not all of us are smart in every single thing. And they've chosen to focus on their area of expertise. And it can be scary to talk to somebody and think, how am I going to know if this guy is just feeding me a bunch of stuff, because I don't know anything about IT. But I think I always look at my own experience, and you know, to me, the example goes to going to a mechanic. I am not inclined with the skills and knowledge to be able to fix my car, but I can tell asking, you know, going to a mechanic and finding out, and the ones who talk to me, the ones who are skilled and who do have these processes that you're talking about, Jeremy, are able to explain, and the fine details of the process might not make sense, but I can tell that they know what they're talking about, that having thought through and built the process to make it work helps you be able to explain that process, because it clarifies everything that needs to be done to get things done correctly.
The other thing you said that made me think is that, and we've talked about this, you know, there's so much to it, and you don't know if someone's feeding you a bunch of BS. And the idea is, I think we have to give ourselves credit, because while it is foreign, there is common sense that can be applied to vetting anybody. You know, we talk about maturity, and you know, asking the provider, you know, how many technical staff do you have? You know, what happens if this person is gone, or this, you know, they aren't available? And understanding in your mind, you know, what kind of redundancy you have, you know, what type of partnerships do you have if I have a problem that you can't solve? You know, who's on your bench that can help me be successful? And while, you know, yeah, there's a lot to some of these questions, there's also just a lot of common sense, where you can just look at the situation and look at where you're going and really, you know, do a bit of a gut check and say, you know, do these people have it together, and are they going to be the ones that can take me to the next level?
You know, Dax, you mentioned the mechanic thing, and I laughed. I wasn't laughing at you, but it made me think.
You can laugh at me, Jeremy. It's fine.
Oh, don't worry. If I have the opportunity to, I will. but just not this case. It's something you said, and Todd kind of brought it home. One of my best friends is an appeals attorney. And I don't know if anybody that's listening to this might be an attorney, or if you have a friend that's an attorney, you know that doesn't mean much when they say, well, I'm an attorney. You're a family law attorney. You're a copyright attorney. You have a specialization. You never just say, well, I'm an attorney. One of my best friends is an appeals attorney. So he's the one that gets a case after it's already been ruled on to get it overturned, or to get it, get a different judgment, or take it up to an appeals court. And he's argued cases in front of the Supreme Court before. What made me laugh was picturing going up to him and just on a friendly basis and just saying, hey, how do you argue a case in front of the Supreme Court? You're going to get a look of like, are you, what? You don't even know how to answer a question like that. And the difference is, I think, and I don't want to go all the way back to the beginning, but it's commoditization. People feel like IT is IT, and it's so commoditized that, how do you do backups? Well, you do it like this. It's not. There's an art, there's a skill, there's a science, there's a process that goes into everything. And if it's not there, you're probably doing it wrong. So, I'm not saying it's a bad question to ask somebody, how do you do backups? But not because you want to know how they do backups, you want to know how they'll answer the question. Because I can tell you that if my friend tried to start explaining to me the nuance of arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court, well, he's just not. But it's a different, it's how they answer it. And it's like Dak said about the mechanic, it's not the answer you give, it's how you give the answer. I think that is really telling.
Yeah, I think, and you said this word a bunch of times in that example that you were giving, and the questions. It comes back around to the questions. Ask questions, ask every question that occurs to you, and go into that meeting with an MSP with a list of questions. Write them down. Don't just imagine that the questions are going to pop into your head in the meeting, but be prepared. And I know that's, some people are rolling their eyes right now going, obviously, but there are other people like myself who are like, I've thought through these questions. I've spent hours thinking through these questions. I'm of course going to remember them in the moment, and then I never do. But be prepared, because I think we've talked about this before, and I'm pretty certain it was actually in a different podcast episode that you had joined us on, Jeremy, that we want people that we talk to when we go to those meetings, we want them asking us those questions. We want them vetting us the way we're vetting them, because that's how we build that partnership. That's how we know that this is going to be a fruitful relationship for both of us, and both of us are going to get the best out of working together.
The other thing with going off of what you said about asking questions is, a lot of what we've talked about so far has been about a business asking questions of an MSP regarding themselves. How would you do backup for me? How would you do this? How do you handle this? The other thing to ask, though, is how do you do backup for yourself? Do you have a backup and disaster recovery plan? Does your backup and disaster recovery plan cover this scenario? Does your backup and disaster recovery plan cover this scenario? And I can tell you there are a lot of, it goes back to the saying, the cobbler's kids don't have shoes. There's a lot of MSPs that do not do their own IT very well, that do not do their own backup very well, that don't operate with a backup and disaster recovery plan, and that don't have security measures in place to protect their own company like they are protecting their supposedly protecting their clients. And so asking how they do things too is really important, because that will reveal some of those areas of maturity, and if they're on top of everything.
Yeah, and I would add to Dax's comment about, and to yours, Todd, about the questions. come in with a list of questions, even if the technical answers don't matter to you as a business owner, they probably don't. Listen to how they answer the questions. And one thing that I would be looking for as a person shopping for an IT partner, if I ask a question, I would expect to be asked as many questions in return, qualifying questions, because most of the questions that a non-IT professional, that a business owner, a lawyer, a doctor, and whatever, that they ask about IT will probably have a follow-up question that it garners. If I go to the doctor and say my knee hurts, they're not going to say, oh, we need to replace your knee. They're probably going to say, well, where exactly does it hurt? What movements are you doing when it hurts? Can you demonstrate that for me? And not whip out a saw and say, well, let's cut that sucker off. You don't generally answer a large question with an answer in anything complicated.
I think it's also important to that not just follow-up questions, but the MSP you're talking to, we talked about signs of maturity and asking you questions about your business, about your goals, so that you have this conversation that encompasses the entirety of what you're trying to achieve is an important sign of maturity. That these guys really are taking the business side of things and taking the strategic side of things seriously, and they're not just coming in to win any business regardless of the situation.
Yeah, it's important to make sure that they'll be able to keep up with you as you grow, because ideally it's going to be a partnership that will help you grow probably more quickly than without them. So are they going to be able at that point to scale along with you?
You know,
Absolutely.
you talked about scalability. And I think another thing to consider there when you're judging the maturity of an MSP, yeah, how do you grow with me? But also, how does pricing change? How does our relationship change from a business standpoint as it goes on? Not just from how you support me technically, but I think most people are under an assumption that the bigger you are, the less expensive IT should be on a per seat basis, or on a per person basis, or per unit of measurement basis, and that's not always the case. It's good to get that up front and know from somebody kind of how your relationship will evolve as you grow from a pricing perspective. I know in the past when we were less mature, we subscribed to that model as well. But in the past, as we've grown and become more complex as an organization, we've realized that as our clients get larger, their environments get more complex and they're harder to support properly. It actually costs more to support them as they get larger. Sorry, I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's true. And having that information up front, I think, is really important for prospects and clients to understand. IT doesn't get smaller by scale; it gets larger by scale from a cost perspective many times.
This may be a little off topic, but I'm reminded of the Men in Black movie where they have this little galaxy that's the size of a keychain that they're holding on, and of course, then our galaxy is huge, and then you see at the very end they step out and they're like in a locker, and they're really, our galaxy is just this little teeny thing, and that's kind of how it is with managed services and with any partner really. Is, there are levels of maturity, there are levels of expertise, there are levels of security expertise, of backup expertise, and all these things go into how we or how successful we can be as an organization and using our IT to get to the next level. The one thing that we didn't talk about either, or yet though, is when it comes down to the pricing and the agreement. What are some of the gotchas that you've seen, Jeremy, that we want to warn people of looking out for, so that they can.
Oh, that's a good one.
Episode.
No, I'd say you just put me on the spot a little bit there. That, the first one that pops into my mind, this is proof we're not scripted, folks. The first one that pops into my mind is under the assumption that we're doing this today to give people kind of a buying guide or advice on how to buy managed services. Get the definition of what all-inclusive means, because all-inclusive means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. When you step on a cruise ship, most things are included, but some things aren't. They call themselves all-inclusive. Having a knowledge before you step into the agreement of detailed scenarios of what will cost extra, what will not cost extra. And typically, whenever, in my experience, it's not about the money that makes a client angry. It's about feeling misled. And that's why in a process, when we get down to the point of talking about pricing and contract specifics, I oftentimes will take charge of that part of the conversation and lead through very specific examples of what's included in our agreement and the things that are not included, because I do not want there to be ambiguity later. It's real easy to say, oh yeah, it's all inclusive, and then hope that those random things that might pop up never pop up and it's all good and you win the sale. But the analogy that I've used when I've trained salespeople and when I've been on an appointment with a salesperson is, this is a small town, it's a small community that we live in. I don't want to be in Walmart or Target and run into somebody and feel like I have to go hide in the other aisle because I done them wrong. I want them to come up to me and, socially distance, but they're, pat me on the shoulder and say, hey, this guy helped me out of a jam and has been a good partner to me, and, introduce me to their spouse, because that's the ultimate form of, that's the ultimate measurement of success to me, a lot more than anything else. And I'd say transparency, get transparency when it comes to what's not included.
Yeah, I love what you said about, how we go in and walk through the agreement, because I think many managed services fall into the trap of, we've had meetings, we've had presentations, and then you send an agreement over via, hand delivered or via email now that everything's electronic, and you're not seeing that level of maturity from the provider that wants this to be a win-win scenario, going, okay, here's clause A, this is what this says. Do you have any questions? This is clause B, this is what this means. Do you have any questions? And going through and really understanding what it is. And it doesn't have anything to do with the size of the agreement. It doesn't have anything to do with the, how legalese it sounds. It's about being on the same page and creating a win-win situation.
Yeah, and it's also, go ahead.
Sorry. Speaking of agreements, this one I think could actually be helpful to people listening, because at least to me, it's not something that I would ever think of. So if the provider has third-party agreements with other vendors, do those agreements contain clauses that will protect your business and data as necessary?
Go ahead, Todd. You jump
Sure,
on that
looking
one.
at me. No, that's a good point. What that means for those that might be listening is that when a provider provides services to you, there are services behind them and there are products behind them. They may sell you a HP computer or Lenovo computer or whatever it is. They may sell you Cisco switches, and they may sell you certain security products. And there are partner agreements with every single one of those sitting on the backside with the MSP and that partner. And what we've seen a lot of companies do is they don't bring some of those privacy and security things forward into the managed services agreement with a client, and therefore there's a security gap essentially between the client and ultimately the partner. And when a situation arises where there potentially is some kind of a security problem, and it doesn't have to be just security, it could be warranty related, different things, then you're in a situation where there's pointing of fingers and problems aren't getting solved, and they're MSP is fighting with a partner or something. And that goes back to what we've talked about in the past of having, deep partnerships, having clarity in the agreement is what we're talking about now, in the sense of, are there any gotchas in a partner agreement that could hurt us? And a lot of our partners in certain scenarios, not a lot, but we're starting to see many partners such as Cisco, where there are certain situations that they require us to include certain language in the client agreements. So we have to do that. And it's just something to ask. It may not be something that applies in every situation, but going back to, it's not the size of the agreement, it's not how all the legalese, but you want to be protected. Protected.
You started talking legal and everybody went to sleep. Sorry, Todd.
Yeah, that's why I said it twice. Wake everybody up.
Now, when it comes, also, the only other thing I'd add is when it comes to the agreements, because, I think we end on the legal part because it's the part that does put people to sleep. I think it's okay when you get into the legal part, the legal conversations with a provider in a negotiation or in a sales process. It may seem kind of uncouth or weird to ask, but I personally welcome the question from a prospect to ask, how do you make money? I actually respect it a lot, because to me, that's a sign of a partner who wants our company to do well so that we'll be here to support them and grow with them over time. Rather than somebody who says, how do I dig every penny out of this and get to the rock bottom? I personally welcome being completely transparent, as does the rest of our company, about how we make money, how we stay here, how we view success, how we view failure, as a good agreement or a bad agreement. And our agreements are structured accordingly. And if you read through an agreement and you understand it, you probably are going to understand that a good managed services agreement will help your company be successful in IT. And the more successful you are in IT, the more upside it has for the MSP, not the other way around. The more stuff that breaks for our clients, the worse it is for us. And it's designed that way on purpose. We want it to be a win-win situation. So we win together, we lose together. And an agreement should be built that way, and it should be transparent in saying that, in my opinion.
So what would you say to a company that you're talking to who would say, well, maybe I would prefer a month-to-month contract? Like, that sounds like, for me, that's a better deal.
Sure. There are places where it could be. We don't deal in that world strictly because we are investing so much into a client's infrastructure up front that we have to, one, make sure that we recoup that investment, but two, we don't really want a short-term relationship. We want to be able to invest in a client. We invest a certain number of headcount per devices that we support. So we actually have employees that we are supporting based on the number of clients that we have. And without a legal agreement, between us and our clients, we can't make the commitments to our client or to our employees that help them better serve our clients. So it's kind of that circle of trust. It's a cyclical type of an agreement that helps us provide for our employees, so our employees provide better for our customers and our clients support us so that we can support the employees, and it goes around and around. We supply some of the best in the industry when it comes to benefits to our employees, and we believe fully that holds through and shows to our clients.
Thank you, Jeremy. I now have the Circle of Life song stuck in my head, and I'll have that in my head for the rest of the day.
It was Circle of Life. I was actually doing De Niro in
Meet the Parents.
Circle of trust.
It's the Circle of Trust.
Circle of Trust, that's right.
Anything you'd add to that, Todd?
Yeah, I'd also add that, it's about maturity. You want somebody, when you reach to a certain level, you want partners by your side for the long haul. When you're looking at a month-to-month agreement, and I want to be careful saying this, but usually what we see is that people are looking at just bottom line cost or easy outs. Or maybe they're looking at, let's just try it and see if it works. But we've had prospects who have gone this route and come back to this. And
yeah.
It really is essentially a level of maturity, because yes, it is about what you talked about, Jeremy, this idea of, JMark is investing in you or in the client. And so there's a win-win situation, but it's also just about the long term. I mean, you are running a company, you want it to be successful. You may be running it, you may have 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans, whatever they are. And a month-to-month contractor does not have your best interests at heart, because they are not looking at the long term. They are looking at saving their bacon every single month and making sure that they do enough to justify their bill to you. Whereas a long-term contract, there is consulting that takes place. There is an mutual understanding of where the company is going, of how we're going to work together to help your business be successful and get to that goal, wherever it is, 5, 10, 15, whatever years from now. And I think that's just so important, because it's not about, just for lack of a better term, it's not about one night stands.
Yeah, and we couldn't do a podcast with me without there being a drawn out analogy that may or may not work, but here it goes.
I've been waiting.
When you're talking about fixing a problem, and you have two providers side by side, provider A you're under a 3-year agreement with, provider B is month to month. The agreement, first of all, you have to acknowledge that the agreement is not one way. It's two-way, as Todd alluded to. It's not only an agreement that you're going to pay us for 3 years, it's an agreement that we are going to provide you this level of service for 3 years.
A guaranteed outcome.
Secondly, it's a guaranteed outcome. Secondly, what gets put into a solution is going to be commensurate to what that person is committed to doing. By that, my analogy would be, if you got a cut and a Band-Aid costs 30 cents, but going to the urgent care and getting it stitched up properly costs $200. Well, if I have to pay for that and I have no commitment to you, I'm going to slap a Band-Aid on it and hope it works out well, because you may not be here in a month. I may not make my $200 back, versus suturing it properly so it does what it's supposed to do and you heal properly. It's a larger investment that I have to put into it from a provider standpoint, but from a relationship standpoint, it's what's right for you. And I know that I'm going to reap the benefits of that as your provider, just as you will for the next 3 years, versus you could fire me next month and I could be out that cost. You have to think that that's what they're thinking about. It goes back to what I said about ask me how we make money. I want you to understand what makes our company profitable so that we can be working together. Just like I want to know what makes you profitable so I can design IT around it. It's a two-way street.
This goes back to the common sense discussion. You know, if all a company is doing is providing month-to-month agreements or short-term agreements or just block time type things, there is this level of commitment that translates from business to client and from MSP to their own employees. And so they are not going to be able to afford, you know, strategic level account managers that can help, that can talk with you and create 5-year strategic plans. They're not going to be able to afford an entire automation team that sends, you know, millions of scripts out to optimize your systems and to make them run better and to alert us or to self-heal things and make them work better. They're basically going to be able to have a small couple tier of help desk support, and it's highly reactive. Most likely they're going to have high turnover because you can't keep people there because it's based on the flux of new clients coming and going. And I mean, in the end, you are just missing out on so much that you could be getting by getting with a long-term partner. It's just a immature move that that has so many ramifications that I don't think people realize. And it comes down to common sense. I mean, if you're paying someone month to month, they can bounce at any time. And what does that mean inside their business?
We run into that quite a bit, and frankly, we don't try to fight it. We give the justification of what that you just heard, and then if a prospect still feels like that's a good move, my answer is usually, well, if that's the route you're going to go, may I have permission to call you back in 6 months and see how it's going, so we can re-engage this conversation, because you'll probably want to be talking again. And sadly, it's generally true.
The other thing that I'll add too is that we didn't really touch upon, maybe a little bit when we're talking about the expertise, is this idea of hiring an MSP that has a very specific business and they add on managed services. We've seen companies in the printer space that have added on managed services. We've seen companies in the test taking space add on managed services. We've seen accounting companies add on managed services. And in the long term, we also see them fail. You know, I mean, we've seen, you know, recently in the Springfield area, there was a CPA that had managed services for a long time. And one day they came in and said, this isn't working, bam, done, gone. and one day they offered it, one day they didn't. We've seen managed services companies who seen printer companies adding on managed services that do these short-term contracts because that's kind of their model with printer supplies, or they, you know, they're adding on this expertise, and it's a different business model. It's a different expertise that's needed. And while there's nothing wrong with a business owner getting into new markets, there's nothing wrong at all with that. But it goes back to vetting. You know, is it a printer company that does a little bit of managed services, or is it a managed services company that does a little bit of printers, or is it a CPA that does a little bit of managed services? And you know, what's the balance? And going back to the questions, what's the redundancy that I have? If I'm your client, how many people do you have? What are the certifications you have? I don't care about your CPA certifications or your printer certifications. I care about the managed services and certifications, the security certifications, all these different things. And it's all of these questions we've been asking about maturity. I mean, they will be very evident in those situations, because generally they don't have redundancy, they don't have awards, they don't have certifications, they don't have the agreements in place for long-term relationships, they don't have the account managers, and it's definitely a much more difficult road to travel.
Yeah, it's funny, Todd. You said you talked about how it comes back to maturity, because that's the first thing I thought of when you started thinking about this. Is that we've circled back around. These companies don't understand. They don't have the maturity of understanding of what it takes to be a managed service provider in order to successfully be a managed service provider. And that comes back around to something else we've already talked about, which is processes. The processes are part of the maturity. Mapping out those processes, building them out, testing them, figuring out everything it takes to successfully support another company in their IT needs in the way that a successful, good partner managed service provider will be able to do. And again, that circles around to yet another thing, which Jeremy talked about, which is when you are vetting these companies, ask them how they make money. Ask them why they have the processes this way, how that all feeds together into making them successful, which moves on to your success, gives them the stability to be there for you and to understand how to take care of you, how to take care of themselves. And so that you have this long-term map to success for both companies that's going to help you get your company to where you want to be, because you're on this road together.
Yeah, Dax, you brought that up, and I was going to bring it up again and reiterate it. The asking them how they make money, but bluntly ask them, what is your company's primary source of revenue? What is your company's primary business? Is managed services a loss leader to sell printers? Hypothetically speaking, because I've run into people that it is.
Right.
And, it's we keep throwing old TV or movie references out there. I come back to The Simpsons, Dr. Nick. Everybody watched The Simpsons, but there's a recurring character called Dr. Nick, and he's just he's the doctor. He'll do anything. You need a physical? Sure, Dr. Nick will do it. You got a brain tumor? No problem. I'll try it. I have a knife. A lot of people look at IT the same way. You know what? I've got a guy who can switch out toner cartridges. I can cross-train him to be a network technician. And didn't always end well.
I was thinking about, Dax, you mentioned about how hard it is. And I hadn't really thought about that. But I mean, Jeremy and I together have over 50 years experience in this industry. And managed services is a very difficult business model. And I only say that because there is so much risk for a business in contracting with a managed service provider, because you're dealing with multiple networks with a million different variables, multiple technologies. You have security vectors all over the place. They're constantly changing. They're never the same. You have patches and monitoring, and you have people to deal with, and you have certifications to deal with, and you have the strategy component. And I mean, it is a difficult business model, and that just raises the impetus to vet the managed services provider and make sure they are the right company for you, make sure that they are on the same level of maturity that you're at, make sure that they are growing at the same rate that you are, and so that you can have this long-term partnership. And we've talked about all these different questions and different things to ask, but it boils down to, maturity. It boils down to common sense. It boils down to asking questions that will help you know whether they're feeding you what you want to hear or whether they're feeding you information that's going to help your business be successful. And we've seen this over and over in our business. We constantly have prospects that are asking questions, and we kind of bang our heads because they're not asking the questions that are going to be helpful to them. And for this reason, we put together a blueprint for buying managed services that that basically lays out all of the different areas of, what is managed services, what are the things you should look for, what are the red flags. And then we've also created essentially an assessment. It's a vetting tool that allows you to line up your competitor or the different managed service providers side by side, ask questions, take notes, and determine which is the right provider. And these are the kind of resources that we are providing because we're at that level that, not to toot our own home, but we may not be the right fit for you. I mean, it's possible that you'll look at this assessment and you will find out that maybe JMark isn't the right fit for you. That's okay. We're looking for companies that are a good fit for us, but it's important just to make sure we take the time and the energy, don't delegate it, and make sure that we're creating partnerships that last.
Thank you for attending this podcast. We hope it has been informative and helped convey that at JMark, we are people first and technology second. To learn more and discover additional content relevant to your business, please visit us online at jmark.com or at LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You may also call us at 844-44-JMark. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again.